Friends, if you're even a little bit curious about the mind-blowing and much-anticipated film Materialists 2025, then you're in the right place. And if you want to enjoy this movie in full English experience, then you must like this video. But hey, if you've landed on our channel for the very first time, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because we bring you the best breakdowns, reviews, and insider information about the latest and greatest films. Trust me, today's video is packed with exciting stuff. Now, let's talk about the movie of the moment, Materialists 2025 star. What is this film really about? What makes it different from other sci-fi thrillers? Is it just another futuristic drama, or does it carry a deeper message beneath the surface? You'll find out everything right here. We're going to dive deep into the film's universe and explain all the key highlights, mysteries, and fascinating moments that make this movie worth talking about. From the very first scene to the final frame, we're covering it all. In today's video, I'll be telling you not just what this movie is, but also where exactly you can watch it, whether it's on an OTT platform, a digital rental service, or maybe even a satellite channel. And trust me, I'll tell you the most effective way to experience this movie so you don't miss even a second of its cinematic magic. Whether you're planning a movie night with friends or just chilling solo with popcorn, this film has something for everyone. We'll also take a detailed look into the technical department, cinematography, editing, sound design, production design, all the nuts and bolts that brought this story to life. What about the music? Oh yes, we'll go into that too. I'll talk about the composer, the soundtrack, and how the score elevates every moment on screen. Plus, we're going to explore the entire behind-the-scenes journey, from pre-production planning to on-set filming, all the way through post-production where everything was polished to perfection. Budget? You want numbers? You'll get them. We'll reveal the film's total production cost and, of course, how it performed at the box office, whether it turned into a blockbuster or had a surprising twist in its financial story. I'll also take you through the movie's story in a spoiler-light way, giving you just enough detail to keep things exciting without ruining the plot. Along with that, I'll share a brief review of the storyline, highlighting what works and what might have been done differently. And we're not stopping there. We'll also uncover some of the coolest, most surprising behind-the-scenes facts about this film, things the casual viewer might not know. Did the cast go through intense training? Was the filming location actually real or CGI? Did the director hide any clever Easter eggs in the scenes? We'll explore it all. Then we'll go character by character, talking about the entire cast, who they are, what role they played, how well they performed, and what made each performance stand out. From the main leads to the supporting players, we're leaving no stone unturned. Every character has a purpose in this story, and we'll explore their relationships, arcs, and how they connect to the central themes of the film. So, friends, get ready to dive into the world of Materialists 2025 like never before. Stick with us till the very end of this video, because we've packed it full of insights, facts, and all the information you need to become a true fan of this movie. So, without wasting any more time, let's get started and enter the dazzling, dangerous, and deeply emotional world of Materialists 2025. The story of Materialists 2025 isn't something you simply watch, it's something you unravel. From the very first frame, the film pulls you into a sleek, seductive world that feels like a mirror held up to our own, only shinier, sharper, and slightly more sinister. It's a society where material success has become the only currency of identity, and everyone's worth is measured in zeros, followers, and brand alliances. There's no time for ethics, emotion, or nuance, unless you can monetize it. And within this dazzling but fragile ecosystem, the plot begins to take shape, slowly but relentlessly exposing the cost of living a life defined by appearances. At its heart, the film follows a group of interconnected characters, all high-functioning, image-obsessed individuals trying to climb the social and financial ladder in a world that never stops watching. But don't expect a traditional single-hero journey here. Instead, Materialists 2025 throws you into a narrative web, jumping between perspectives and timelines with unapologetic boldness. One moment you're following a tech entrepreneur obsessed with status and expansion, and the next you're in the head of a rising influencer who's built a following out of manufactured authenticity. Each character is deeply flawed, yet oddly compelling. You might not like them all, but you will understand them, and that's where the story really gets its hooks in. The structure of the narrative is nonlinear, but it's not random. It's designed like a puzzle. Every scene offers a new piece of context that reshapes how you understand what came before. Sometimes you'll revisit a moment you've already seen, only this time through a different character's eyes. What seemed like betrayal in one version might be revealed as desperation in another. A quiet glance in one timeline suddenly takes on a different meaning when seen later with more context. The film plays with memory, motivation, and moral ambiguity, making you question who is really in control and who is just reacting to a game they never agreed to play. The first act sets up this world in dazzling detail, immersing you in the lives of its central players while slowly introducing the cracks forming beneath the surface. We see how success is curated, how relationships are transactional, and how loyalty is just another currency to be spent. Then comes the inciting incident, a revolutionary investment scheme that promises unimaginable wealth, control, and immortality in the digital space. It's a Faustian bargain wrapped in a pitch deck. At first, it brings the characters together, but as the stakes rise and the consequences unfold, it becomes clear that not everyone will survive what they've signed up for, physically, emotionally, or spiritually. The second act pushes the characters to their breaking points. Tensions explode. Secrets come out. People begin to implode under the weight of their own contradictions. And yet, the movie doesn't rush these breakdowns. It lingers on them. You see the slow-motion collapse of friendships, relationships, and identities. There's a raw intimacy to the downfall, like watching glass shatter in slow motion. One of the film's strengths is that even at its most chaotic, it remains emotionally grounded. Every twist has a psychological consequence. Every betrayal leaves a scar. And every decision echoes through the lives of these characters in ways that feel tragically real. By the time the third act arrives, the story has taken a more introspective, almost philosophical turn. It's no longer just about the money, the power, or the status. It's about what's left when all of that is stripped away. The climax is a revelation rather than a spectacle. There are no slow-motion shootouts or dramatic courtroom scenes. Instead, there's a quiet moment of clarity, when one character finally sees the full picture and the entire meaning of the story crystallizes in a single breath. And then it hits you. This was never about winning. It was about waking up. The final moments of the film tie everything together in a way that's both satisfying and unsettling. You're left thinking about the characters long after the screen fades to black. Where did they go? Did they change? Or are they just trapped in another loop, pretending to be something they're not? The beauty of the narrative is that it doesn't give you easy answers. It gives you reflection, discomfort, and just enough closure to make you sit with your own thoughts. What's most fascinating is how Materialists 2025 takes a high-concept, futuristic premise and anchors it in timeless human emotions, greed, fear, envy, love, loneliness. The conflicts are as internal as they are external. Characters aren't fighting monsters or robots. They're fighting the version of themselves they've become in order to survive. And those battles are far more devastating. Ultimately, the story operates on multiple levels. It's a thriller, a social commentary, a psychological character study, and a cautionary tale. It demands your attention and rewards it with depth. Every scene, every flashback, every silence, it all means something. And when you finally step back and see the whole picture, you'll realize that the story wasn't just about them. It was about us. In Materialists 2025, character development isn't just a background detail. It's the engine that drives the entire film. Every twist in the plot, every dramatic reveal, every quiet, heartbreaking moment is shaped by who these people are and who they become. These aren't stock characters filling out a sci-fi template. They're real, layered, unpredictable, and emotionally raw. And the film takes its time peeling them open, showing how much of themselves they're willing to sell, trade, or destroy in the name of status, relevance, and belonging. The film centers on a rotating ensemble of characters, each of whom represents a different side of the materialist culture. At the forefront is Dorian Vale, the charismatic tech visionary who's made his fortune off a world-changing algorithm that now governs everything from credit scores to dating matches. On the surface, Dorian is the archetype of success, polished, brilliant, and always one step ahead of the game. But beneath that perfect exterior is a man haunted by irrelevance. He's terrified of fading into obscurity, of becoming obsolete in a world that worships the next big thing. His arc is one of slow psychological erosion. At first, he manipulates people with ease, treating them like components in his machine. But as the story progresses, we watch him unravel, first emotionally, then morally, until he's forced to confront the emptiness at the core of everything he's built. He doesn't get a neat redemption arc. His journey is jagged, messy, and at times disturbing. But it's also one of the most gripping transformations in the film. Then there's Lena Voss, the face of every luxury brand on the planet, a social media icon whose every move is tracked, monetized, and mimicked. She's not just an influencer, she's an industry. But Lena's power is her mask. Her every smile is rehearsed, every public appearance choreographed. In private, she's exhausted, fractured, and trapped by the very image she created. As the story unfolds, we see Lena wrestling with a loss of identity. She doesn't know who she is anymore without the validation of millions of strangers. Her transformation is a slow shedding of skin, a painful journey of trying to find something real in a world where everything, including her own emotions, has been packaged for public consumption. One of the film's most powerful scenes comes when Lena breaks her silence during a live interview, dropping the act for just a moment. And in that one raw instant, you see the entire illusion collapse around her. It's not flashy. It's not loud. It's human, and it's devastating. Next is Julius Rain, the financial strategist and venture capitalist who's made an art out of detachment. To him, people are numbers, trends, liabilities. He's brilliant, cold, and obsessively rational until life throws him into a situation where logic no longer applies. Julius's arc is one of forced vulnerability. After years of making decisions from a distance, he suddenly finds himself in the emotional center of a personal crisis he can't outsource, hedge against, or write off. Watching his transformation is like watching a machine develop a heartbeat. He doesn't become emotional overnight, but you see the cracks forming, the tremble in his voice, the hesitation in his choices, the flicker of guilt he can't quite ignore. He begins as a man who thinks emotions are inefficient and ends as someone who realizes that efficiency can't protect you from grief, regret, or love. And then there's Mira Caldwell, the quiet, analytical presence who initially seems like just another player on the edge of this high-stakes world. But Mira is the sleeper character, the one who watches, questions, and slowly begins to pull the thread that unravels everything. She's not flashy, but she's fearless. While the others are driven by fear of losing what they have, Mira is driven by a hunger for truth. Her strength lies in her refusal to play the game the way others do. Her arc is not about climbing to the top, but about exposing what lies beneath the surface. And through her, we begin to see the story's deeper layers, the systemic rot behind the glamour, the price of silence, the danger of unchecked power. Myra's transformation is subtle, but seismic. By the end, she's no longer the quiet observer, she's the moral compass the story desperately needs. What makes these arcs so effective is how they interlock. The characters aren't just developing in isolation, they're developing against each other. Dorian's paranoia pushes Lena into a corner. Julius's emotional collapse disrupts Myra's investigation. Lena's public unraveling forces Dorian to make a choice that shifts the entire story's direction. Their relationships are fluid. Friends become enemies. Enemies become reluctant allies. Trust is built and shattered in the same breath. Every scene adds a new wrinkle to their dynamic. You never quite know who to root for, because everyone is capable of both betrayal and redemption. Even the supporting characters are layered. There's the fixer with a tragic past who quietly manipulates events from behind the curtain. The rival CEO who masks deep insecurity with performative confidence. The idealistic in turn who serves as a painful reminder of who the others used to be before they sold out. These aren't throwaway roles, they're reflections, contrasts, warnings. They add texture to the world and depth to the journey. By the time the story ends, every main character has been transformed, not always for the better, but always with meaning. Some lose everything and find clarity. Others gain everything and realize it means nothing. And a few are left in that haunting middle ground, forever caught between who they are and who they tried to be. What makes the character development in Materialists 2025 so compelling is that it mirrors real life. Change isn't always clean. Growth isn't always linear. Sometimes the most powerful evolution is simply accepting the truth of who you are, even if that truth is uncomfortable. These characters stick with you, not because they're perfect or heroic, but because they're honest. They reflect the parts of ourselves we often hide. The ambition, the fear, the longing to be seen, the temptation to trade authenticity for acceptance, and the hope, quiet, persistent, that it's not too late to reclaim something real. That is where the heart of the story lives. Not in the world it builds, but in the people who try, and sometimes fail, to find themselves inside it. The performances in Materialists 2025 are the engine that powers every emotional beat, narrative twist, and visual flourish. The actors don't just play characters, they dissolve into them. This isn't a film where performances are designed to impress with theatrical flair or dramatic monologues. No, the brilliance here lies in the precision. Every line, pause, stare, smile, and silence is calculated and packed with tension. These actors understand that in a world built on artificial perfection and curated identities, the most powerful emotion is the one that escapes by accident. They let us feel the cracks beneath the surface. Let's begin with the actor portraying Dorian Vale, a tech industry messiah with the mind of a genius and the soul of a ticking time bomb. The role demands constant contradiction, charm and menace, inspiration and manipulation, brilliance and burnout. And this actor plays all those notes without ever once looking like he's reaching. In public scenes, Dorian floats through conversations with elegant control, his voice always modulated, his gestures rehearsed to perfection. But behind closed doors, the mask slips. And what makes the performance chilling is that it doesn't collapse into rage or hysteria. It unravels through subtle gestures. A speech that trails off. A smile that holds a second too long. A hand trembling ever so slightly while pouring a drink. You start to realize that the version of Dorian we're shown isn't who he really is, it's who he needs us to see. And the actor makes us feel complicit in that illusion. It's a performance that never stops asking, who are we performing for, and what happens when no one's watching? Opposite him, the actress playing Lena Voss turns in a performance that could easily become the most iconic role of her career. Lena is the kind of character that demands emotional gymnastics. She has to perform for an audience within the film while also conveying an internal battle for identity and self-worth. The actress navigates this duality with heartbreaking elegance. In one scene, she's confidently delivering a monologue to a crowd of investors, dressed head to toe in designer armor, flawlessly delivering a brand-friendly speech. In the next, she's alone, makeup half-smudged, watching herself on a phone screen and questioning whether any part of her life is real. It's not just a fall from grace, it's a slow, grinding deconstruction of a carefully engineered persona. She makes us feel every crack, every forced laugh, every breath that feels like it's holding back tears. There's a scene late in the film, no words, just a shot of her sitting in a glass elevator, descending alone through a luxury high-rise at night, that captures the emptiness behind her empire, and her stillness in that moment hits harder than any scream ever could. Julius Rain, the finance genius, gets a quieter but no less devastating performance from his actor. He's a man defined by rules and control, and that's exactly how the performance begins. Tight, clipped, analytical, unreadable. But it's the slow softening of this exterior that makes his arc so rewarding. You can tell from the way he scans a room, how long he holds eye contact, how he listens before speaking. He's always running calculations. But when those calculations stop protecting him, When real life crashes through the glass, we see him react in ways that feel painfully human. There's a scene where he receives a phone call that delivers devastating news. He doesn't shout. He doesn't weep. He simply exhales, rests his head against the window, and stares at the skyline. That moment lands like a punch because of how the actor doesn't react. It's all internal, and it's perfect. His descent isn't loud, but it's deeply, almost surgically precise. You feel him falling apart even when his suit and tie are still flawless. Then we have Mira Caldwell, played with haunting intelligence and quiet defiance. Mira is the calm center of the chaos. She doesn't move fast. She doesn't raise her voice. But you hang on her every word because there's something behind her eyes, a history, a plan, a pain she refuses to show until absolutely necessary. The actress behind Mira gives a performance built on stillness. She makes silence feel dangerous. Her presence is subtle, almost shadow-like, but every time she enters a scene, the energy shifts. She's watching, calculating, waiting. And when she finally makes her move, it's so controlled and devastating that you realize just how much power she's had all along. Mira's strength isn't in what she says, it's in what she chooses not to say. That kind of performance is hard to pull off. It demands total emotional control, and she nails it from start to finish. But Materialists 2025 doesn't just rely on its leads. The supporting cast is full of performances that could easily carry their own spin-off films. There's the former mentor of Dorian, now a bitter rival and cultural relic. The actor playing him delivers a monologue in a cigar lounge that feels like it could go viral on its own, a mix of menace, melancholy, and dry wit that practically steals the scene. You can feel his resentment. You can taste his envy. And the power struggle between him and Dorian becomes one of the film's most layered subplots. Then there's the intern, played by a newcomer with astonishing vulnerability. He starts the film naive and eager, and slowly transforms into someone broken by the very people he admired. His quiet disillusionment becomes a mirror for the audience, and his final scene, sitting alone in a train station, looking at the glowing screen of a phone that once meant everything to him, will absolutely stay with you. Even the minor characters, assistants, analysts, influencers, ex-lovers, are given room to shine. Every performance feels lived in. There are no extras pretending to type in the background. Everyone feels like they've walked out of their own fully developed story. Every actor seems to know not just what their character is doing, but why they're doing it and what it's costing them emotionally. What makes the entire ensemble so remarkable is the chemistry they share. It's not the kind of chemistry built on romantic sparks or comic timing. It's psychological. Characters watch each other like predators. Conversations carry years of unresolved tension. The way two people avoid eye contact in a boardroom tells you more about their past than any flashback ever could. The performances are interconnected, layered like a network of silent wars and unspoken truths. And the cast handles it all like they've been living in this world for years. This isn't a film filled with over-the-top, award-bait performances. It's a film filled with restraint, precision, and control. And when those performances finally do erupt, when the walls come down, when characters break or confess or finally lash out, it's explosive because the groundwork has been so carefully laid. The actors don't just perform. They build tension. They withhold. And then they detonate. You don't walk away from Materialists 2025 thinking about how good the acting was in a technical sense. You walk away feeling like you've met these people. And maybe even recognized parts of yourself in them. That's not just great acting. That's transformation. The direction of Materialists 2025 doesn't just guide the film, it defines it. This isn't one of those stories that could have survived with a different hand behind the camera. The entire mood, structure, aesthetic, and emotional force of the film radiates from the director's unwavering and at times daring, creative control. Every scene, every movement, every silence feels purposeful. The result is a film that feels both cinematic and deeply psychological, like you're watching something happen around you, not just in front of you. What immediately strikes you is the confidence in tone. The director sets the mood early and refuses to compromise. From the opening sequence, a slow, sterile drone shot over a mirror glass cityscape, bathed in synthetic morning light, you understand that this world is immaculate on the surface and absolutely rotting underneath. That visual contradiction becomes the emotional thread of the entire film. The tone is icy, meticulous, but vibrating with tension, as if the characters are constantly one small gesture away from collapsing under their own illusions. And the director leans into that discomfort. There are no jump cuts to let you escape, no soft montages to smooth out the edges. You're held inside every uncomfortable beat until it wrings you dry. The pacing is masterfully controlled. It doesn't sprint. It doesn't drag. It unfolds. At first, the story might seem slow, but this isn't dead space. This is tension building, the kind that quietly wraps around your ribs. The director understands that suspense isn't just for thrillers. Here, it's used to explore identity, ambition, and self-deception. The pauses are pregnant with implication. Characters speak with curated precision, and when they don't, the silence feels just as sharp. The director lets moments hang. A character reaching for a glass. A glance not returned. An elevator closing on someone mid-sentence. These fragments aren't wasted. They become emotional punctuation marks. That restraint, that patience is rare, and it turns otherwise quiet scenes into psychological battlegrounds. Stylistically, the director paints in sharp contrasts. Cold, minimalist architecture clashes with warm lighting that somehow feels artificial. Scenes of social grandeur, gala events, business launches, influencer parties are filmed with surgical distance. The camera doesn't immerse, it observes, like a voyeur at a fashion show with a scalpel. This approach turns the opulence into satire. And when the camera does push in close, it's only to expose discomfort. Eyes twitching, hands trembling, breath quickening. That control over spatial intimacy is part of the director's toolkit. Wide shots emphasize isolation. Extreme close-ups trap characters inside their own masks. Mirrors are used constantly, not just as props, but as thematic tools, fracturing characters, distorting their realities, and at times reflecting things not quite as they seem. One of the most distinctive choices the director makes is with transitions and timelines. Rather than relying on text cards or obvious flashbacks, the past and present blend together in elegant, seamless movements. A conversation will be interrupted by a sound, a camera tilt, a lighting shift, and suddenly you're somewhere else in a different time, looking at the same moment from another angle. The film becomes a memory maze, one where characters are constantly walking through the echoes of their own decisions. This nonlinear structure could have collapsed under weaker direction, but here it's a precise choreography. Each time you revisit a moment from a new perspective, the emotional and thematic weight changes, deepening your understanding not only of the characters, but of the entire world they inhabit. Lighting plays an essential role in shaping mood, and the director uses it like a character. Bright scenes aren't comforting, they're interrogative. Soft scenes aren't romantic, they're fragile. Artificial lighting, neon, LED strips, phone screens, is everywhere, replacing natural light and quietly reinforcing the film's obsession with artificial identity. You never forget that this is a world curated for display. And when the lighting finally breaks, when the shadows take over or the daylight suddenly feels real, it's jarring in the best way. It signals something cracking inside the characters. Even sound design is weaponized. The score doesn't instruct you how to feel. It creeps up on you. Sometimes, the music drops out entirely, leaving only ambient noises, ticking clocks, distant city hums, the mechanical whir of a smart home assistant. The silence becomes oppressive. And when the music returns, it's never triumphant. It's aching, ambient, glitchy. It feels like it's trying to keep up with the characters, mimicking their internal chaos. There's a recurring motif where the sound of a character's own breathing becomes louder than the room. That's not a tech issue. That's direction. Blocking and movement within scenes are just as exact. During scenes of negotiation or confrontation, characters are always subtly shifting position, not to make the scene visually interesting, but to establish dominance, vulnerability, or power reversals. One character might begin a conversation seated confidently behind a desk, but by the end, they're standing alone by a window, visibly shrinking. Another might be boxed in between two other characters, framed to show how trapped they feel even while speaking. These aren't accidental placements. The director turns every frame into a reflection of what the character is refusing to say out loud. And then there's the emotional direction. The actors here are not just allowed to explore, they're guided. You can feel a consistent tone across performances, even as each character occupies their own unique space. The emotional range is vast, but the volume is dialed down, forcing the audience to lean in, pay attention, decode expressions. This isn't direction that demands big performances. It demands real ones. And that control bleeds through into the most intimate moments. The scenes of emotional collapse don't feature shouting or melodrama. They happen in silence, in repetition, in characters saying one thing while their body says another. The director knows how to get actors to that point, where performance becomes presence. Even the final moments of the film, where everything starts to unravel or crystallize, depending on how you see it, are handled with restraint and grace. The director doesn't throw in a twist to shock. Instead, they offer a long, continuous sequence that ties together the emotional arcs with visual echoes from earlier scenes. Familiar spaces look unfamiliar. Characters find themselves alone in the same places they once felt powerful. And the very last shot, no music, just the sound of wind and a blinking cursor, is a quiet, devastating punctuation mark that lingers long after the screen goes dark. This is direction that doesn't beg for attention, but it earns your obsession. Every choice feels like a whisper of something deeper. You don't just see the director's vision. You feel it breathing behind the screen, shaping every pause, every angle, every drop of tension. The result isn't just a story. It's an experience of control, illusion, unraveling, and what it means to finally see yourself after years of hiding behind something shinier. In Materialists 2025, the cinematography isn't simply a tool, it's a philosophy. It isn't just about making the frame look beautiful, it's about making the frame speak. Every camera angle, every sliver of light, every shift in focus contributes to the unspoken tension that runs beneath the entire film like an electric current. The visuals don't just complement the narrative, they complete it. The cinematography is what makes the world of Materialists 2025 feel not just believable, but inescapable. From the first moment, the camera asserts itself as a character. The opening scene glides above a city that looks more like a sculpture than a place people live in. Towering, mirrored skyscrapers slice through clouds, and streets pulse with artificial light, but there's no warmth. The camera hovers detached, clinical, like it's studying the characters before they're even introduced. That distance becomes a visual motif, a world watched from the outside, where everyone performs and nothing is truly private. Even as we move closer into interiors, private offices, penthouses, luxury clubs, the camera remains careful, measured. It never rushes. It observes. Lighting is where the cinematographer delivers a masterclass in subtext. Many scenes are awash in cold whites, icy blues, and muted silvers that make the world feel as though it's been bleached of authenticity. Characters bathe in artificial light, from ring lights, LED walls, phone screens, and it creates this unsettling duality where they're always illuminated but never revealed. The light touches their skin but never warms it. This technique gives everything a plastic, almost hyperreal sheen. But that's the point. These are characters living curated lives in curated spaces. And when the lighting does shift, when a character sits in a dark room lit only by a flickering screen or sunlight bleeds through a crack in the curtains, it feels almost violent. Natural light in this world is rare, and when it appears, it hits like truth. Awkward, uninvited, and impossible to ignore. One of the film's most striking choices is its use of framing. The cinematographer constantly traps characters in visual cages, between glass panels, behind screens, inside reflections. Conversations are often shot with characters partially obscured by objects, or speaking through mirrors, or reflected twice, sometimes 3 times, in a single frame. This is a world of endless surfaces, and the camera never lets you forget it. Even in intimate moments, characters are framed with distance, as though their emotions can't quite break through the architectural perfection that surrounds them. There's a quiet brutality to it. The more vulnerable a character becomes, the more the camera isolates them, framing them alone in cavernous rooms, letting the negative space speak volumes. It's a visual language of alienation. Camera movement is handled with an almost surgical intelligence. When characters feel powerful, the camera is still, symmetrical, composed. Boardrooms are filmed like temples of control, wide, perfect, silent. When characters begin to lose their grip, the cinematography responds. The camera begins to move, not wildly, not chaotically, but with unease. It drifts slightly off-center. It loses symmetry. In one breathtaking scene, the camera circles a character spiraling into self-doubt, slowly, deliberately, each rotation becoming tighter, more suffocating. There are no cuts. The tension builds purely through motion. The cinematographer understands that the audience's anxiety doesn't come from seeing too much, but from seeing just enough and being forced to sit with it. And then there's the use of depth. The cinematographer doesn't just shoot across rooms. He shoots through them. Glass dividers, sheer curtains, water walls. These aren't just production design elements. They're used as layers. Conversations are filmed through multiple visual barriers, making the viewer feel like they're always eavesdropping, never quite welcome. This enhances the film's central themes of performance, secrecy, and emotional distance. You don't just watch the characters. You observe them like an outsider trying to decode a perfectly maintained illusion. Color grading further cements the mood. The overall palette is sleek but subdued, sterile whites, matte grays, steely blues. But color isn't absent. It's used sparingly and with devastating precision. When red enters a scene, an accessory, a neon sign, a bleeding sunset, it means something. Color becomes emotional punctuation. One character's emotional collapse is marked not by shouting or crying, but by a slow wash of amber light from a bedside lamp, gradually overtaking the scene as she sits motionless. Another character's moment of rage plays out in a dim room with a single streak of neon red bisecting his face. These are choices that don't announce themselves loudly, but once you notice them, they start to feel like a secret language between the film and its audience. There are visual callbacks and repetitions that become more noticeable on repeat viewings. Locations are revisited, but never shot the same way twice. An elevator that once symbolized power, clean, centered, brightly lit, is later shown cracked, with flickering lights and a tilted frame, reflecting a shift in power. A corridor that first felt endless and sterile suddenly feels claustrophobic when the camera stays close behind a character in motion. The cinematographer subtly transforms space into emotion. Places evolve with the characters. You never see the same hallway or office the same way twice because the psychological weight of the moment changes the way it's lit, framed, and felt. One of the most daring choices comes during a late film montage where the characters' various deceptions and regrets collide. The montage is silent, no music, no voiceover. It's just visual fragments, a spilled glass of wine, a cracked phone screen, a slow zoom into a forgotten childhood photo. Each shot lasts barely a second, but the composition is so precise that each one feels like a punch. The cinematographer doesn't need dialogue or exposition. The camera speaks. Perhaps the most unforgettable moment comes in the final act, when a character stands before a massive, curved digital screen, used earlier as a backdrop for product launches and investor pitches, now glitching, distorting his reflection as he faces a choice that will define him. The camera doesn't cut. It moves forward, slowly, as the screen pulses and his silhouette warps and stutters, visually tearing him in two. No dialogue. No score. Just image. Pure, brutal, emotional image. It's the kind of cinematography that doesn't just decorate the scene, it is the scene. What makes the cinematography in Materialists 2025 so powerful is that it always serves something deeper. It doesn't distract. It doesn't overpower. It reveals. It listens. It builds tension in the way light lingers too long on a face. It creates character by where the frame chooses to begin and end. It sculpts atmosphere with glass, shadow, and silence. And when the world finally begins to unravel, it does so visually, long before any character admits what's happening. This is cinematography that doesn't try to impress you with visual tricks. It doesn't show off. It watches, waits, and then when the moment is right, it breaks your heart with a single, perfect frame. The editing in Materialists 2025 isn't there to merely move the story along. It's the very heartbeat of the film. It doesn't just cut from scene to scene. It slices through surface-level narrative and digs directly into the characters' psychological landscapes. In a movie about perception, performance, and the masks we wear, the editor becomes an unseen puppeteer, controlling when we see the cracks, how long we stare at them, and when we're allowed to look away. This isn't just about fast or slow pacing. It's about emotional timing, rhythm, and tension that builds beneath the skin. The pacing of the film is remarkably patient in the beginning. That's not to say it's slow. On the contrary, it's deliberately still. The editor uses long takes, slow dissolves, and uninterrupted scenes that force you to sit with the characters rather than race past them. In these early sequences, everything is immaculate. The transitions are so seamless they feel invisible. You move from polished living rooms to luxury boardrooms, from elevator rides to designer parties, without feeling the machinery behind it. The cuts are elegant, smooth, restrained. The tempo here matches the curated, calculated lives of the characters. Nothing is rushed because nothing appears to be falling apart, yet. But that's where the magic lies. The editor understands that tension doesn't have to come from what happens. It can come from how long you wait for something to happen. A perfectly framed shot of a dinner table is held just a second too long after the conversation ends. A scene that should cut when the door closes instead lingers, showing us a character silently standing behind it. These aren't glitches. These are choices. These are moments where time stretches, where silence weighs more than dialogue. That discomfort becomes the editor's most powerful tool. We begin to realize something's not right before the story even confirms it. That's pacing with psychological precision. As the story deepens and the pressure on the characters increases, so does the pace, but not in a traditional action suspense kind of way. It becomes more fragmented, more anxious. Scenes begin to cut more frequently, not wildly, but rhythmically, like a heartbeat quickening. Flashbacks start to interrupt the present. Memory and reality start to blur. Sometimes, you're not even sure when you've jumped back or forward in time until the lighting or a prop quietly shifts. That disorientation isn't clumsy, it's intentional. The editor is aligning the audience's experience with the character's unraveling mental states. This is pacing that bends not around plot, but around emotion. There's a technique used throughout the film that's especially effective: visual mirroring. A scene early in the film may end with a slow zoom into a character's expressionless face, only to be mirrored later by the same framing, but with the character visibly cracking. These editorial callbacks create emotional echoes, tying the past and present together through visual language rather than exposition. The result is a rhythm that feels hauntingly recursive. You start to recognize patterns, see the cracks reappear, and feel the emotional weight compound. Time loops, not literally, but emotionally. That's editing used as narrative architecture. One particularly impressive sequence midway through the film uses intercutting to track 3 characters simultaneously. Each is in a different setting, facing a personal moral or emotional crossroad. The editor shifts between them not based on action, but based on mood. A pause in one storyline triggers a beat in another. A moment of silence in one space bleeds into rising noise in another. These transitions are more than just clever. They build emotional tension like music. The rhythm becomes its own layer of storytelling. You're not watching 3 characters. You're watching one unraveling story, spread across 3 lives, stitched together through masterful pacing. The film also knows when to use restraint. Not every scene is packed with movement or urgency. In fact, some of the most powerful moments are the quietest. The editor isn't afraid to hold on stillness. A character staring into their own reflection. A long walk down a hallway with nothing said. A phone ringing with no answer. These moments breathe, but they don't drag. That's a subtle difference. Breath allows emotion to bloom. Drag kills momentum. The editing in Materialists 2025 walks that razor-thin line and never stumbles. It lets us feel the silence as much as the dialogue. Music and sound also play a crucial role in how scenes are cut. At times, the editor syncs the pacing with ambient tones, like the quiet clicking of a keyboard, the hum of an LED billboard, or the ticking of a luxury wristwatch. These sounds aren't just atmosphere, they act as emotional metronomes. In one scene, a character's internal panic is mirrored by rapid cuts that align with the staccato rhythm of an elevator's descent. Elsewhere, the absence of sound stretches a moment to unbearable tension. There's an extended scene in which a key emotional reveal unfolds entirely without music. No swell, no cue, just breath, silence, and editing that refuses to cut away until the viewer is forced to confront the character's raw, unfiltered reaction. That's editing with nerve. The nonlinear structure is handled with elegance and clarity. Flashbacks emerge organically, not with on-screen timestamps or tonal shifts, but with subtle visual and emotional cues. A change in aspect ratio. A slow focus on an object tied to memory. A change in posture or facial expression that signals we've left the present. The film asks you to pay attention, to connect the dots not just logically but emotionally. The editor doesn't hold your hand. Instead, they trust the audience to feel the story rather than just follow it. That trust becomes part of the rhythm. You lean in because you know nothing will be explained twice. The final stretch of the film shifts gears again. After a buildup of rising tension, fast cuts, and emotional fragmentation, the editor slows the pace dramatically. This slowdown is crucial. It allows the consequences to sink in. Characters don't shout their way into catharsis. They retreat, they isolate, they collapse inward. The editing honors that. Cuts become fewer. Scenes are allowed to drift. The transitions soften. It feels like watching aftershocks, quiet but powerful. That lingering sense of unresolved emotion, of choices made and paths not taken, is shaped entirely by how the editor controls time and movement. And it leaves you with a feeling that doesn't go away when the credits roll. And that's what's so remarkable about the editing and pacing in Materialists 2025. It isn't flashy. It doesn't draw attention to itself. But it leaves fingerprints on your emotional memory. It makes you feel the slow build of identity, the collapse of façade, the ache of being seen too clearly. Every beat, every pause, every carefully timed transition is doing something vital. It makes time feel fluid, emotion feel immersive, and narrative feel alive. This is editing that listens before it speaks, and when it speaks, it doesn't shout. It cuts clean and deep. The soundtrack and score of Materialists 2025 operate with the kind of subtle brilliance that you don't immediately notice, but you feel it under your skin. From the very first scene to the final frame, the sound design isn't just music, it's architecture. It helps build the emotional landscape, it maps the psychological terrain, and in the quietest moments, it says what the characters can't. This is not a film where music exists for decoration. It exists to haunt, to seduce, to fracture, and sometimes, to completely vanish. The first thing you notice about the score is how eerily restrained it is. There's no dramatic orchestration or predictable emotional swells. Instead, the film opens with a near-silent atmosphere broken only by a soft, synthetic pulse, something that feels half like a heartbeat, half like a digital glitch. It's the sound of unease, of control masquerading as calm. This kind of ambient minimalism sets the tone for a world where everything is curated, calculated, and emotionally distant. It doesn't announce the film's mood. It invites you to sink into it, slowly, like falling into water that's colder than expected. What's fascinating is how that pulse becomes a recurring motif. It evolves as the story progresses, becoming layered, more distorted, or dissolving entirely, depending on the scene. Early in the film, it's pristine and clean, like the technology and luxury the characters are surrounded by. But as relationships crumble and truths surface, that clean pulse gets broken. The same note that once felt sleek and modern now feels hollow and anxious. It's a brilliant sonic metaphor for the way these characters' perfect lives begin to fall apart. The composer doesn't rely on melody in the traditional sense. You're not going to walk out humming any part of the score, and that's entirely intentional. The music isn't meant to be remembered, it's meant to be felt. It seeps into the scenes like a fog. Tones stretch endlessly without resolution. Drones hover beneath dialogue like ghosts. At times, it feels like the score isn't guiding your emotions, it's echoing them, magnifying what's already there. It doesn't push. It listens. And that restraint gives it extraordinary power. One of the most impactful decisions is the way the music shifts depending on perspective. When a character is performing, giving a pitch, making a public appearance, presenting their best self, the score becomes sleek, synthetic, almost too perfect. It reflects their external mask. But when we cut to their inner world or see them alone, the music fractures. Notes bend. Static bleeds into the mix. Melodies drift off without ending. It's subtle, but it creates a subconscious rhythm. The public-facing sound is polished, the private sound is decayed. It draws a sonic line between reality and performance. Silence, too, is weaponized in astonishing ways. The film has long stretches where there's no music at all. No background track, no ambient wash, just silence. These moments aren't empty. They're intentional pauses, like emotional white space. They give you time to sit with a glance, a hesitation, a realization. One of the most emotionally brutal scenes in the film, a confrontation between two characters who know each other too well, has no score whatsoever. You hear every breath, every shift of posture, every swallowed word. When music does finally return, it's not as relief. It's as reverberation, like the emotional impact is catching up to the characters just a few seconds after they've spoken. But then, when the score does want to make a statement, it knows exactly how to do it. There are a few standout compositions that hit hard, not with volume but with precision. In one scene, as a character finally confronts a truth they've been avoiding, the score begins as a single piano note repeating at a slightly irregular rhythm. It's not beautiful. It's unsettling. Then, layer by layer, the soundscape builds, metallic tones, soft dissonant strings, digital blips that resemble heartbeat monitors. But just as it starts to swell, it cuts out completely, just silence again. That silence lands like a gasp. You realize the music wasn't there to dramatize the moment. It was there to set the stage for the moment's collapse. There's also an expert use of diegetic sound, music that exists inside the world of the film. At influencer parties, fashion shows, or product launch events, the soundtrack is full of hypermodern electronic music, artificial, trend-driven, impeccably mixed, but completely soulless. These tracks don't just set the scene, they comment on it. You can hear how fake these environments are. You can hear how desperate they are to sound relevant. In stark contrast, there's a scene where a character listens to a scratchy vinyl record in a dim apartment alone. The music is raw. It wobbles in pitch. It feels real. And in that moment, so does the character, for the first time in the entire film. One of the most creative musical sequences comes in the third act. 3 characters are unraveling emotionally in 3 separate storylines, and instead of jumping between 3 pieces of music, the composer creates one evolving soundscape that binds them together. The score threads all 3 narratives into one sonic descent, starting with a soft melody, adding distortion, overlaying echo, dragging tempo. By the end of the sequence, the original theme is nearly unrecognizable, buried under sound debris. And that's exactly the point. The score reflects what's happening not just physically, but emotionally. They're all unraveling, and so is the music. And then there's the final piece, the last cue of the film, which plays over the final moments and into the credits. It's not grand. It's not orchestral. It's a slow, low pulse, barely a melody, played on what sounds like a half-broken synth. There are long pauses between notes. You keep waiting for resolution, for a payoff, but it never comes. The score ends not with closure, but with silence. It leaves you in emotional suspension, still turning over everything you've just seen. That kind of ending only works when the music has carried the story all the way through. And in Materialists 2025, it absolutely has. This score isn't designed to be remembered as catchy or hummable. It's designed to haunt. It's a score that seeps into your nervous system, rides the emotional highs with quiet reverence, and drags the lows into a place you can't quite name. It's built with intelligence, empathy, and restraint. The music of Materialists 2025 doesn't just enhance the story, it knows the story. It breathes it. And by the time the credits roll, it's already lodged somewhere inside you, still playing even after everything else has stopped. Materialists 2025 * doesn't operate like a film that's trying to teach you something. It's not handing out morals like bullet points. Instead, it plants its themes deep inside the narrative and lets them grow, slowly, disturbingly, and inevitably. You feel the ideas creeping up on you, and before you realize it, the questions this film is asking are the same ones you're asking yourself. It's one of those rare stories where the themes aren't layered on top of the film, they're baked into its DNA. Let's start with the most immediate and sharply observed theme, the illusion of identity. The film dives into a world of people who've constructed perfect versions of themselves, online, in business, in relationships, but who are slowly being eaten alive by the distance between that persona and who they really are. It's not just a critique of influencer culture or tech startup branding. It's an exploration of the terrifying moment when you realize that you've been performing for so long, you don't remember how to stop. Every main character is struggling with this in their own way, some through denial, some through manipulation, and a few through quiet, soul-deep collapse. The message? That when your entire life is curated for validation, the truth becomes something you hide even from yourself. Connected to that is the theme of value versus visibility. In the world of Materialists 2025, being seen is the new currency. Fame, even microfame, is power. But the film never celebrates that power. It unravels it. It shows how being constantly visible doesn't make anyone feel more known. Instead, it creates this surreal emotional distance where every interaction is filtered, every relationship becomes strategic, and self-worth is measured in metrics. The characters chase success, but success keeps shifting, one viral moment to the next, one product launch, one podcast appearance. They run faster and faster in a hamster wheel of optics. The film doesn't just expose that cycle, it makes you feel the exhaustion of it. It asks the deeper question, if everything about your life is optimized for attention, what happens when the spotlight moves on? There's also a scathing but heartbreakingly human examination of emotional commodification. The movie isn't just interested in how people sell products, it's fascinated by how they sell pain. Personal trauma, loss, family tension, everything becomes content. Characters mine their most private moments to shape public narratives. One character builds a brand on radical transparency, sharing their therapy sessions and breakdowns on video. But the more they share, the less real it all becomes. The film shows this with aching clarity, how vulnerability becomes branding, how real emotion gets flattened into digestible sound bites. And yet, it doesn't ridicule them for it. That's what makes the message so haunting. It's not saying these people are evil, it's saying they're trapped in a system where sincerity only has value if it trends. The theme of control and surveillance pulses just beneath the surface, and not in the usual sci-fi way. There are no evil corporations watching through your webcam. But everyone in this film is always watching each other, followers, fans, critics, competitors. There's a psychological surveillance state where self-expression becomes a risk. Every post is a potential backlash. Every misstep is a scandal waiting to happen. The pressure to always be on bleeds into their most intimate spaces. Even their friendships are strained by performance anxiety. There's one character who never stops smiling, never lets their image slip, and when it finally does, it's not cathartic. It's terrifying. That's the true cost the film explores. When you lose control of your image, you lose control of your identity. And then comes the devastating theme of disconnection in hyper-connected lives. Everyone in Materialists 2025 has access to everyone else. Calls, texts, DMs, tagged posts, it's all instant. But genuine connection? That's nearly extinct. The characters orbit each other like satellites, visible but untouchable. They sleep in the same beds but hide behind glowing screens. The film captures that unique loneliness of our time, the kind that doesn't come from isolation but from never being truly seen even when you're always visible. It's one of the saddest truths the story explores, that we've built systems to connect everyone to everyone else, but somehow we're more emotionally alone than ever. An equally gripping idea the film wrestles with is the weaponization of authenticity. In a world where everyone is pretending to be real, the one who's most believable wins. But what happens when authenticity becomes just another mask? Characters manipulate others by pretending to open up. They confess things not to heal, but to gain sympathy, to score PR points, to redirect blame. The film doesn't treat this as cartoonish villainy. It shows it as survival instinct. When audiences only reward pain that looks a certain way, people start performing pain. And the scary part is it works. It works too well. The film doesn't scream this message. It just lets you watch it unfold, scene by scene, until you can't ignore how broken the system is. Then there's the undercurrent of existential dread, the sense that beneath all the glamour and branding and power plays, no one knows what any of it means. Characters achieve everything they set out to do. They get the investors, the followers, the book deals. And yet, there's this empty space inside them that only grows. The film doesn't offer a spiritual or philosophical answer. It just sits with the question, what happens when you win at a game you don't actually believe in? There's no big monologue about it, no moment where someone spells it out. But you feel it, in their eyes, in their silences, in the slow crumbling of their perfectly arranged lives. Another stunning layer is generational conflict. The film quietly but persistently contrasts older forms of power, legacy wealth, traditional media, institutional prestige, with newer forms like digital influence, crypto wealth, and algorithmic fame. Characters from different generations clash, not just ideologically, but emotionally. One side sees tradition as safety. The other sees it as a trap. But neither side is fulfilled. One lives in fear of being irrelevant, the other in fear of being exposed. The film doesn't pick a side. It just lets both crumble in parallel, showing how the systems we build, old or new, rarely protect us from ourselves. And throughout it all, running like a thin wire through every storyline, is the theme of yearning. Yearning to be seen, to be known, to matter for more than numbers and headlines. It's subtle but constant. It's in the way a character hesitates before posting. In the way another rehearses a conversation before walking into a room. In the way someone listens to an old voicemail just to hear a voice that once felt real. Materialists 2025 isn't cynical about this yearning. It honors it. It understands that beneath all the posing and branding and optimization, the human need for connection is still burning quietly, desperately. And that might be the film's most powerful message of all. Not that the world is fake, or that people are shallow, but that we're all just trying to hold on to something real in a world that rewards everything but truth. The movie doesn't resolve these themes. The visual effects in Materialists 2025 are not designed to dazzle in the traditional sense. They're designed to deceive, to seduce, and to subtly distort your sense of what's real. This is a film where VFX doesn't explode across the screen. It hides in plain sight, polishing reality until it becomes something artificial, aspirational, and slightly unreal. That's the trick. The effects aren't here to showcase technological prowess. They're here to immerse you into a world where everything looks perfect, but nothing feels quite right. And once you notice that tension, that gap between what you see and what you sense, it becomes one of the most powerful storytelling tools in the entire film. From the very first frame, you're introduced to a world that is both familiar and alien. It's not a distant sci-fi future. It's our world, just exaggerated. Sharper, shinier, cleaner. Every skyline, every showroom, every high-rise loft looks like it was rendered in a luxury product commercial. And in a way, that's exactly what the film wants you to think. The CGI isn't used to build a fantasy world. It's used to perfect the real one. Lighting is too flawless. Skies are too symmetrical. People's skin glows a little too evenly. Buildings reflect light in ways that feel more computer-generated than physically possible. But it's not obvious. It's precise. These micro-adjustments create a reality that's been filtered, smoothed, and streamlined, like the characters themselves. And that's no accident. You see it in the architecture. The buildings aren't designed for humans. They're designed to be seen. Their glass facades shimmer with algorithmic beauty, casting reflections that ripple like synthetic water. But look closer, and you realize those reflections are sometimes subtly wrong, too symmetrical, slightly delayed, as if the environment itself is running through a render engine. These touches are subtle enough to avoid detection on a first viewing, but once you notice them, they're everywhere. The city becomes a kind of high-resolution simulation. Beautiful, empty, unnerving. The use of interface CGI is another area where the film excels. Characters interact with their world through wearable tech, projected UIs, AI assistants, and touchless screens. But unlike many tech-heavy films where interfaces fly around the screen like fireworks, Materialists 2025 keeps everything cool and minimal. A character swipes the air and a menu appears in smooth motion, hovering at an angle that reflects the room's lighting. Someone blinks, and their digital contact lens switches from real-world view to data overlay. None of this is done with spectacle. It's shown as normal, boring, background stuff, which makes it all the more convincing. The CGI here doesn't distract from the story. It is the story. It's how these people live now, through screens and filters and enhancements. You stop questioning the tech not because it's flashy, but because it feels eerily plausible. But the brilliance of the film's visual effects isn't just in how slick they are, it's in how that slickness breaks down. The most powerful sequences aren't the ones with visual perfection, but the ones where perfection starts to crack. You'll be watching a character walk through their smart home, and suddenly a wall projection glitches for a split second. An AI assistant responds with a voice that's just slightly off-key. A mirror displays a real-time filter that delays by half a second. It's barely perceptible, but it hits hard. These tiny visual fractures become a reflection of psychological ones. The world itself starts to lose its grip, not because the tech fails, but because the illusion of control begins to fade. One particularly striking sequence involves a character watching a playback of their own live stream. As the camera pans around the room, everything in the background begins to shimmer and melt like corrupted video. But the character remains pristine, flawless lighting, perfect posture. It's a moment of pure psychological horror wrapped in digital decay. The visual effects turn what should be a standard digital experience into something dreamlike and deeply disturbing. The world literally becomes unstable while the person maintains their on-camera image. That contrast between glitch and gloss is one of the film's recurring visual metaphors. The CGI also works in tandem with practical effects, and that collaboration is seamless. Real sets are designed with minimalistic precision, cold lighting, blank surfaces, clean geometry, allowing digital effects to be layered in without resistance. A scene might take place in a real apartment, but a cityscape beyond the windows has been digitally replaced with a hypersaturated skyline pulsing with light. Or a practical mirror might show a real reflection, until suddenly it doesn't. It shows a version of the character a few seconds out of sync, digitally delayed by some unknown interface. These aren't just tricks, they're psychological cues, telling us that even our most personal spaces have become part of the illusion. Even more fascinating is how Materialists 2025 uses VFX to blur the line between reality and virtuality. Some of the film takes place in immersive digital environments that are meant to feel just like the real world, but they never quite do. The visual language changes slightly. Depth of field is tighter, movement is smoother, colors are marginally more saturated. You can't always tell at first whether a scene is real or a simulation. And that's the point. The film weaponizes visual effects to reflect the character's confusion about what's authentic and what's curated. You're not watching a world fall apart. You're watching a world that never was whole to begin with. And then there are the more abstract, emotional sequences. Flashbacks, memories, daydreams. These moments break free from realism entirely. They dissolve into painterly imagery, digital blurs, time reversals, ghostly overlays of past and present. One character walks through their childhood home, and the hallway stretches impossibly long, looping behind them. Another scene shows a party where everyone's face briefly morphs into a different version of the same influencer. These moments rely heavily on CGI, but not for spectacle. They're designed to feel like the characters' minds, fragmented, programmed, collapsing under their own branding. What truly sets the film apart is how the visual effects are emotionally driven. They don't exist to wow the audience. They exist to unsettle, to mirror, to distort. The CGI doesn't say, "Look at this cool future." It says, "This is what happens when you try to curate your soul." And that's what makes it so impactful. The effects don't break immersion, they become the immersion. They wrap around the characters like armor, then betray them when they need it most. By the time you reach the final act, the visual language of the film has subtly transformed. The once pristine, polished world now flickers. Overlays are misaligned. Augmented reflections lag. The light feels colder, more sterile. The CGI doesn't escalate into chaos, it just quietly lets the mask slip. And when it does, the emotional payoff is devastating. Because the real twist isn't the digital breakdown, it's the realization that the world these characters built never had any reality to begin with. The set design and locations in Materialists 2025 don't just create a world, they create a feeling. A feeling of artificial comfort, of luxury with no soul, of surfaces so polished they slip right through your fingers. Every room, every street, every object on screen tells a story about perfection and the emotional cost of chasing it. The production design isn't just visually stunning, it's psychologically loaded. And as the film unfolds, these locations do something more than just look good. They expose the very hearts of the characters living inside them. Let's start with the architecture. This film exists in a world where aesthetic has triumphed over intimacy. You'll notice it immediately in the living spaces: sharp angles, floating staircases, floor-to-ceiling glass, brushed metal countertops, and pale wood floors that feel more like a showroom than a home. There are no messy coffee tables or cluttered shelves here. Everything is curated. But that's the point. These characters live in places that are designed to be photographed, not inhabited. And it works beautifully with the story's themes. You can feel how lonely it must be to live in a space that's perfect for a photo shoot but awful for crying on the floor at 2 a.m. Props follow this same logic. Every object you see is handpicked for both beauty and emptiness. Phones are sleek slabs of future tech. Books are color-coded and clearly unread. Art is abstract and cold, chosen more for status than taste. Even the kitchen appliances seem unused, more like props in a lifestyle ad than tools for living. There's one particularly haunting moment where a character makes tea using a voice-activated system in a kitchen that looks like it belongs in a museum. The result? A warm drink in a sterile room, and a sense that even basic rituals have lost their warmth. The film's workspaces are no less telling. Offices and boardrooms are stripped of personality. There are no family photos, no sticky notes, no personal touches. Just endless glass partitions, ambient lighting, and digital displays embedded into walls. It's all incredibly impressive to look at, but also strangely oppressive. These are spaces designed to optimize productivity, not people. And the film uses them to underline a crucial idea. When we strip away humanity in favor of design, we lose something vital. The silence in these rooms doesn't feel peaceful, it feels suffocating. Social spaces in the film are equally loaded. Luxury clubs, rooftop lounges, influencer-only wellness centers, they're all designed with a terrifying precision. Velvet furniture in matte earth tones, brass fixtures, mood lighting that adjusts itself based on your digital profile. These places aren't welcoming. They're performance arenas. You can feel the anxiety humming beneath the surface. People aren't here to relax. They're here to be seen. The locations themselves almost seem to judge you as you walk through them. There's no comfort, only curation. And then there's the contrast. Hidden throughout the film are spaces that break the design mold. A cramped, disorganized apartment filled with old books and worn blankets. A faded diner with flickering lights and greasy booths. These places are jarring when compared to the main world of the film, and that's intentional. They feel real. They feel alive. And when characters enter them, something changes. They become quieter, less rehearsed. Their voices drop. Their movements slow. The set design doesn't just reflect tone, it dictates it. In these warm, imperfect spaces, the characters start to remember who they are beneath all the layers of branding. The outdoor locations are equally deliberate. Urban environments are cold and sharp, neon underlit, architecturally exaggerated, and eerily clean. Parks are trimmed into perfect symmetry, more like product backgrounds than places of peace. But even nature has been curated in this world. There's a moment when two characters visit what looks like a serene forest retreat, only to reveal it's a synthetic nature dome, complete with programmable birdsong and artificial fog. It's one of the film's most visually compelling locations, and also one of its most thematically brutal. Even escape has been engineered. One of the standout achievements of the set design is its use of mirrors and reflections. Rooms are designed with reflective surfaces at almost every angle: glass, chrome, mirrored walls. But it's not just about looking stylish. It's about constantly showing characters to themselves. They're never alone. They're always observed, even by their own image. This adds a layer of visual paranoia that builds across the film. You don't need a villain peeking around a corner when the room itself is doubling your presence back at you. Color also plays a significant role in the visual construction of the world. Warm tones are rare and reserved for moments of vulnerability or memory. Most spaces are lit in cool whites, icy blues, and muted grays. It makes the world feel pristine, but also dead. This isn't a place where children run barefoot or where anyone spills soup. It's a place where feelings go to die. And the more you see of it, the more you realize that this perfect world is actually a prison made of beauty. Even the smallest set details contribute to character development. One character's house is filled with rounded edges and pale colors, soft, unthreatening, corporate feminine. Another's has brutalist architecture, concrete walls, and exposed wiring, a fortress of dominance. A third character's space changes throughout the film, becoming more chaotic, more personal, more human, as they begin to let go of the curated life they've built. None of this is accidental. Every piece of furniture, every lighting fixture, every window frame is telling you who these people are, or who they want to be. And then, just when you think you've seen everything this world has to offer, the film gives you a final space, a blank room, with no features at all. Just white walls, a chair, and a screen. It's almost antiseptic. But it's also the most honest space in the entire film. Because in a world of constant performance, emptiness can be the only place where truth finally speaks. In Materialists 2025, the set design is not background, it's front and center. It shapes the world, reflects the characters' inner lives, and quietly critiques every inch of the reality they've built for themselves. It's a masterpiece of visual storytelling that never distracts from the plot. Instead, it builds it scene by scene, surface by surface. You don't just watch this world. You inhabit it. And once you do, it's hard to leave. Because even when it looks perfect, you can feel the tension pulsing beneath the walls. The dialogue in Materialists 2025 doesn't just move the plot forward, it reveals the world. It peels back layers, exposes fractures, and lets us eavesdrop on lives lived in high definition but low intimacy. Every conversation feels like it's happening on multiple levels, the surface level of what's being said, and the deeper, darker level of what's being avoided, performed, or disguised. The brilliance of the script lies in its control, knowing when to be razor-sharp and knowing when to say almost nothing at all. At first glance, the dialogue feels sleek and efficient, like everything else in the film's world. Characters speak in curated phrases, corporate buzzwords, influencer-ready affirmations. I don't chase, I attract, one character says in a boardroom scene, channeling a tone so polished it sounds algorithmically generated. Another casually drops a line like, your engagement's dropping, are you okay or just irrelevant? The writing mimics how people speak when they're trying to perform intelligence, status, or emotion for an audience. That's not a flaw. That's the point. The script is a mirror reflecting the way we edit ourselves in real time. These characters aren't talking to each other. They're often talking at each other, pitching versions of themselves they want others to believe. And then there are the power conversations, the passive-aggressive duels wrapped in smiles. The dialogue in these scenes is like a chess game played in silence, every word chosen with surgical precision. It's brave to be so transparent. One character says, when what they really mean is, "You just made a fool of yourself." "I love how raw you're being," says another, when the subtext screams, "You've lost control." The script has a way of weaponizing kindness, turning politeness into dominance. It's not just what they say, it's how they say it, when they say it, and what they're really saying underneath. Every line is loaded. The film also thrives on monologues, but not the grand theatrical kind. These are monologues wrapped in PR spin, TED Talk charisma, podcast authenticity. One character opens up about their mental health journey in front of a virtual audience, describing their breakdown like a bullet-pointed case study. Panic attacks were just another system update, unpleasant, but necessary for the reboot. The writing here is biting. It shows how even vulnerability can be transformed into a product. The scene is both powerful and disturbing because the words are so smooth, so media-trained, that you question whether the emotion is real or just a new brand pivot. And then, suddenly, the script will let all that performance drop. There are a handful of quiet, emotionally raw moments where the dialogue shifts into something stripped down, unfiltered. One character sitting alone mutters, "I don't think I know how to be off anymore." Another, in a rare moment of intimacy, whispers, "If I stop being who they think I am, I'm not sure there's anything left." These lines hit harder than any dramatic confrontation because they feel stolen, like the character didn't mean to say them out loud. The script doesn't force these moments. It waits for them. It earns them. There's also a sharp undercurrent of wit running through the film, not loud or slapstick, but bone-dry and cutting. Nothing says authenticity like 5 hours of glam, one character quips while prepping for a self-care live stream. In another scene, a tech CEO says, "We don't manipulate people, we just give them what their dopamine already wants." The writing is smart without being self-congratulatory. It understands the tone of the world it's created, self-serious, overstimulated, and dripping with contradiction. The script also excels at the unsaid. Silences are used like punctuation marks. A glance across a dinner table, the pause before someone responds to a question they didn't like. These moments are crafted with care. You feel the tension building in the things people don't say. There's a recurring scene format where characters are recorded or watched without knowing, and the things they say off-camera are often the most revealing. It's a brilliant structural choice because it lets the audience feel like they're catching the real story behind the filtered one. Dialogue becomes layered, like peeling back digital wallpaper to find a human heartbeat underneath. What's particularly remarkable is how well the script understands modern language. It speaks fluent startup jargon, influencer speak, faux spiritual Instagram captions, and emotionally manipulative PR statements. But it doesn't mock them. It uses them. It embeds these tones in the characters so naturally that they feel authentic, not because they're deep, but because they're true to how people speak when they're trying to matter online. One character says, "We're not selling a product. We're selling a feeling of worth." And in that one sentence, the film nails the tragedy of branding culture. And then come the lines that haunt. The ones that don't feel written. They feel discovered. "I used to believe I was becoming someone," one character says in a late-night conversation. "Now I just think I was layering costumes." Another, facing the collapse of their empire, asks, "If no one's watching anymore, did I ever really exist?" These aren't catchphrases. They're emotional landmines. And the script doesn't highlight them. It just drops them like they're nothing, which makes them land even harder. Ultimately, the writing in Materialists 2025 is a masterclass in tone. It captures the voices of a hyper-mediated generation without making them caricatures. It satirizes without being cruel. It critiques without preaching. It balances slickness with sincerity, artifice with ache. And it never lets you forget that in this world, words are currency. Dialogue is a tool, a mask, a product. But occasionally, just occasionally, it becomes a scream for help. And those are the moments when the film stops being a performance and starts being something heartbreakingly real. Materialists 2025 is not the kind of film that fits neatly into one genre box. It slips through your fingers if you try to label it too quickly. At first glance, it might feel like a psychological drama set in a sleek, tech-obsessed world, but stay with it long enough, and you'll start to see traces of satire, hints of thriller, even ghost story energy lurking beneath its perfectly composed surfaces. What makes its genre execution so compelling is that it doesn't just follow genre conventions. It manipulates them. It uses them to lure you in, and then slowly turns them inside out. On paper, this is a futuristic social drama, something in the vein of a character study dressed in designer tech. But unlike most films in that territory, it doesn't build its tension through huge plot twists or external threats. There's no villain in a leather chair, no rogue AI, no high-stakes countdown. Instead, the danger is quieter. It's the slow erosion of identity, the suffocating pressure of being always visible, the dread of living a life that's been monetized to the point of meaninglessness. The film knows the conventions of dystopia and psychological thrillers, but instead of dramatizing them with gunfights or chase scenes, it lets them unfold in minimalist showrooms, networking events, and spiritual retreats where people are smiling too hard. That's the subversion. The horror isn't a monster in the shadows. It's a ring light in your face and an audience you can't turn off. It plays with the structure of a thriller, but does it in whispers. Tension builds through misalignment, not confrontation. A character's expression doesn't match their voice. A well-rehearsed pitch falls flat. A moment of intimacy is revealed to be scripted for content. These moments don't explode, they curdle. There's a constant undercurrent of unease, a slow throb of suspense that builds without traditional stakes. You keep waiting for the big twist, and when it comes, it's not a twist of plot, it's a twist of perception. Suddenly, everything you thought was genuine feels orchestrated. Everything you thought was performance might be real. It doesn't flip the genre table, it rearranges it while you're looking away. The film also dips into dark satire, particularly in how it handles influencer culture, startup ideology, and emotional branding. But it doesn't go full parody. It doesn't mock these worlds with broad humor. Instead, it lets them mock themselves. The absurdity comes from how calmly everyone accepts the madness. A character calmly explains a social ranking system tied to self-worth scores, like it's weather data. Another launches a self-care product line inspired by their childhood trauma and smiles like it's the proudest moment of their life. The film's wit is dry, sharp, and uncomfortably close to real life. That's the trick. It doesn't break the genre. It stretches it until it snaps without a sound. And then there's the drama. That's where the emotional depth sneaks in. Underneath all the tech and tension and satire, this is still a story about people, lonely, ambitious, broken people trying to matter in a world that commodifies their every move. The film doesn't overload with sentimentality. It keeps emotions tightly wound. But when the drama breaks through, when someone cracks under pressure or reaches for real connection, it lands hard. Because it's been earned. You've watched these characters live in a system that trains them not to feel, so when they do, it hits like an earthquake. That's a genre payoff of a different kind, one rooted in restraint rather than escalation. What's also fascinating is how the film flirts with sci-fi, but never fully embraces it. The technology is advanced, yes, but just advanced enough to feel inevitable. You never see anything too far-fetched. Everything feels like it could happen within 5 years. That grounded realism makes the story hit even harder. The tech is there to support the themes, not steal the spotlight. This isn't a film about gadgets. It's a film about how gadgets change people. That puts it in the lineage of speculative fiction, but without the need for visual spectacle. It trusts the audience to fill in the blanks. And that's a bold genre choice. Even the pacing plays with convention. Where most genre films would give you escalating tension, this one leans into disintegration. Things don't build up, they wear down. By the end, the film isn't sprinting toward a climax. It's spiraling into a realization. That's a subversion of everything we've come to expect from thrillers and dramas. There's no cathartic explosion, no moral epiphany, no final act of redemption. There's just the quiet horror of seeing yourself clearly for the first time and realizing you've become the very product you were selling. And for all its sophistication, the film still manages to keep you hooked. The script keeps pulling you forward. The dialogue keeps hinting at things just out of reach. The performances deliver layers that unfold slowly. It doesn't rely on cliffhangers or jump scares. It relies on atmosphere, tone, and a creeping sense of psychological claustrophobia. You're not watching to find out what happens next. You're watching to understand why everything feels so wrong. In short, Materialists 2025 doesn't just play with genre. It questions whether genre can even contain it. It borrows the language of drama, thriller, satire, and speculative fiction, but then uses it to tell a story that feels startlingly original. It doesn't check the usual boxes. It scribbles new ones in the margins. And it dares you to follow along as it deconstructs not just the world it's showing you, but the expectations you brought with you when you pressed play. Materialist 2025 * is more than just a story. It's a cultural pressure cooker, and the moment you step into its glossy, filtered world, you start to feel the heat. The film isn't trying to shout about the issues of our time. It doesn't hold up signs or give monologues about what's broken in society. Instead, it does something much more unsettling. It shows you a world that looks just like ours, only slightly more polished, slightly more digitized, slightly more commodified, and lets you slowly realize that it's not a vision of the future. It's a mirror. The social commentary begins with identity. Not identity in a traditional philosophical sense, but identity as a product. In this world, who you are isn't defined by your values or your inner life. It's defined by your metrics. Your relevance, your brand, your emotional visibility online. The film leans hard into the commodification of selfhood, showing characters who've become so entangled with their digital personas that they've started to live according to the algorithms that manage their worth. Their every action, every sentence, every facial expression feels calculated for effect because they know someone, somewhere, is always watching. And not in a dystopian surveillance way, in a consensual performance way. They're performing their lives not just for attention, but for survival. It dives headfirst into influencer culture, without making the mistake of simplifying it. These aren't vapid caricatures. They're complex individuals who've internalized the idea that every experience must be optimized, recorded, and repackaged for engagement. One of the most striking elements is how the film explores emotional capitalism. The way feelings are turned into content, struggles become monetizable narratives, and vulnerability becomes a sales pitch. You'll see characters deliver confessions that feel scripted, breakdowns that look like they were lit by a professional team, and wellness retreats that exist purely to produce lifestyle content. The film doesn't mock this behavior. It shows how it evolved naturally from the systems we already live in. That's what makes it disturbing. It feels plausible. But the commentary goes deeper than social media. It stretches into class. Materialists 2025 examines the aesthetics of wealth, not just how the rich live, but how they curate their morality. It's not about owning things anymore. It's about owning the right things. The right brands, the right values, the right causes. The elite in this world perform ethical consciousness the same way they perform fashion, stylishly, strategically, and only when it benefits their status. One character launches a tech platform designed to measure people's inner worth, while simultaneously manipulating its algorithm to punish users who deviate from marketable behavior. That's not just a plot detail. It's a statement about digital meritocracies, about how moral superiority can be commodified, about how empathy itself can be gamified for clout. The film also takes aim at our obsession with optimization of time, of productivity, of the self. There's a haunting sense that no one in this world is allowed to simply be. Every action must be measured, every thought streamlined. Even therapy is data-driven. Even grief is analyzed for engagement potential. There's a particularly chilling scene where a character is coached through a personal loss by an AI assistant that rates their emotional expression on a scale of market resonance. It's subtle satire, but it lands hard because it feels like something a startup could pitch tomorrow. And race, gender, and beauty politics are present too. Not through clunky exposition, but through visuals, through casting, through the way characters are treated based on how closely they align with the dominant aesthetic. The film doesn't hammer you with identity politics. It just shows you how certain bodies move through this world more smoothly than others. It shows who gets platformed, who gets tokenized, who gets deleted. It shows how difference is flattened, how culture becomes something to be mined, repackaged, and sold back to consumers as diversity branding. These choices aren't loud, but they're felt, and they make the world of the film feel unnervingly close to ours. Mental health plays a major role as well. Not as a subplot, but as a kind of collective condition. Everyone in the film is anxious, disconnected, sleep-deprived. But instead of confronting those feelings, they brand them. Radical transparency becomes an excuse to monetize breakdowns. Emotional wellness becomes an industry that offers meditative playlists and microdose snack bars instead of real human connection. The film's take on mental health isn't cynical, it's critical. It shows how the language of healing can be twisted into another form of productivity, another tier on a subscription plan. It asks, quietly but insistently, what happens when we treat self-care like a business model? The film also examines technology not through fear, but through familiarity. There's no evil robot uprising, no mind control implants, just subtle tools, augmented mirrors, emotion-tracking wearables, algorithmic job placement. The kind of tech that feels helpful at first until you realize it's shaping how people see themselves, how they make decisions, even how they love. It's not dystopian, it's seductive. And that's what makes it so effective as commentary. It doesn't warn you about a possible future. It shows you how the present is already nudging you there. And perhaps the boldest critique the film makes is this. In the pursuit of control, curation, and constant visibility, we've lost something essential. Not just privacy or authenticity, but uncertainty. The right to be messy, to be unsure, to fail without branding it. The film argues that in a culture obsessed with defining and displaying ourselves, we may be forgetting how to simply exist. That's a powerful idea. And it's delivered not through preaching, but through quiet, brutal observation. Materialists 2025 doesn't try to solve any of these issues. It doesn't offer answers. What it offers is a world where these issues have been taken to their logical extremes, a world that looks alarmingly like our own, but just slightly pushed. And in that push, in that stylized distortion, the film forces us to look back at our own lives and ask the uncomfortable question, how far off are we really? That's the kind of social commentary that doesn't fade when the credits roll. It lingers. It stings. It makes you reach for your phone and then think twice before unlocking it. Watching Materialists 2025 is less like passively sitting through a movie and more like walking into a carefully curated mirror. One that doesn't just reflect your face, but reflects your habits, your contradictions, your scrolling patterns, and your deepest digital instincts. From the moment the film begins, there's a feeling that you're being watched, not by the characters, but by the world they live in. And strangely, it starts watching you back. That's the film's secret weapon. It doesn't just want to entertain you. It wants to engage you mentally, emotionally, and almost uncomfortably personally. Emotionally, the film works like a slow burn. It doesn't tug at your heartstrings with swelling music or tear-jerker monologues. It creeps under your skin with surgical precision. A character smiles at their own reflection, and you laugh, until you realize you've done the exact same thing before a selfie. Another character has a breakdown, but it's live-streamed in perfect lighting with a sponsored logo behind them, and the absurdity hits you, not because it's funny, but because it feels way too familiar. The film evokes a constant state of double consciousness. You're watching the characters perform their lives while simultaneously recognizing how much of your own life is performed. That awareness becomes a kind of emotional tension that never lets up. But it's not all heavy. There's sharp humor here, too. Not the laugh-out-loud kind, but the kind that cuts with accuracy. One of the most effective laughs comes when a character hosts a virtual disconnect to reconnect, retreat, broadcast in real time across 4 platforms. Another leads a group therapy session using emotionally optimized keywords, and everyone thanks them using templated gratitude phrases. The satire is so on point that it triggers not just laughter, but a nervous sort of recognition. You're not laughing at the world. You're laughing because you know this world. The film also engages on a deeper psychological level. It doesn't rely on explosive moments to grab attention. Instead, it plants small emotional seeds, scenes that feel quiet at first, but later blossom into full-on internal reckonings. A character staring at a curated feed of their own life. A lover asking, "Do you ever say anything that isn't for someone else to hear?" A child asking why they need to smile again for the family archive. These moments sting. They stay with you. They spark thought spirals that last long after the screen fades to black. You don't just watch the story, you carry it into your own thoughts afterward. There are moments of shock too, but not in the traditional jump scare or twist reveal sense. The shocks here are existential. There's a scene where a character deletes their identity profile, and for a full 30 seconds, nothing happens. No alarms. No chase. Just silence. And in that stillness, you realize how truly invisible a person can become when their digital presence disappears. It's terrifying not because of what's happening, but because of what it says about us. That's the kind of jolt this film delivers, not to the senses, but to the soul. It also invites obsession. Not because of flashy set pieces or big mystery boxes, but because of its layers. This is the kind of film that demands a second viewing. On the first watch, you're pulled into the plot, the performances, the dazzling visuals. But on the second, you start noticing things. How a character's wardrobe subtly shifts with their emotional arc, how reflections in the glass show alternate versions of reality, how background ads change based on what the characters are feeling. These aren't just Easter eggs, they're emotional echoes. They make the film feel alive, reactive. Like it's learning from you as you watch it. Discussion is practically built into the DNA of the film. When it ends, it doesn't leave you with closure, it leaves you with questions. What parts of our identity are real, and which are curated for attention? Is emotional honesty even possible in a culture that rewards performance? What does authenticity mean when even our pain becomes content? These are questions with easy answers. But they're the kind of questions that make people sit in silence after the credits roll. Or turn to the person next to them and say, "Wait, what do you think that scene meant?" It sparks debate, reflection. That's engagement on a higher frequency. And the emotional resonance sneaks up on you. You don't realize how attached you've become to certain characters until they hit their breaking point. You don't know how tense you've been until a scene gives you space to breathe. And then, in the final act, when the façade finally starts to crumble, when someone dares to feel without filtering, you might find yourself holding your breath. Not because something big is happening, but because something real is. That emotional shift feels earned, and it hits like a wave. More than anything, Materialists 2025 engages by turning the audience into participants. It doesn't just ask you to watch. It asks you to reflect, to examine your own digital life, your choices, your contradictions. It leaves you wondering how much of your day is lived authentically and how much is staged for someone else's invisible feed. It doesn't point fingers. It just holds the mirror. And in that mirror, you might laugh, you might cringe, or you might see something you weren't ready to confront. But you'll definitely feel something. And once you do, you won't forget it. Because Materialists 2025 doesn't just want your attention. It wants your awareness. It wants you thinking long after the final frame, and if you're like most people, it'll succeed. When Materialists 2025 enters the conversation, it doesn't just echo other films in its genre. It challenges them, reshapes them, and sometimes straight up stares them down like a mirror asking, "What are you really trying to say?" This isn't just another dystopian cautionary tale, another social satire, or another tech-infused drama about our digital lives spiraling into chaos. It belongs to that growing family of modern psychological fiction that sits somewhere between Black Mirror, Her, The Truman Show, and Ex Machina, but it brings its own distinct energy to the family reunion. And that energy feels quietly dangerous. Start with Black Mirror. That's the obvious comparison, especially for viewers who expect sleek tech settings, identity horror, and ethically gray storytelling. But where Black Mirror episodes often punch you in the face with a dark, ironic twist, Materialists 2025 is more like being slowly wrapped in a beautiful, glossy ribbon, and then realizing too late it's a noose. The horror here doesn't come from futuristic nightmares. It comes from systems that already exist. This film doesn't need to invent a wildly advanced tech dystopia. It just nudges the dial slightly on everything you already know: smart homes, digital branding, social scoring, and lets the emotional fallout do the talking. That's where it sets itself apart. It's not speculative. It's predictive. And that subtlety makes it hit even harder. Then there's Her, the Spike Jonze film that made people fall in love with their operating systems. Materialists 2025 shares that interest in loneliness, digital dependency, and intimacy in the age of automation, but it flips the tone. Her is soft, melancholic, and romantic. Materialists is colder, more clinical, more cutting. Where Her asks, can a machine understand love? This film asks, can a human still feel love if they're always performing? Both films care about connection, but they approach it from different ends of the emotional spectrum. One offers gentle heartbreak. The other offers a quiet scream. You could also compare it to The Truman Show, especially in how it explores curated lives and the spectacle of constant observation. But again, Materialists 2025 pulls the curtain back in a different way. In The Truman Show, the protagonist doesn't know he's performing. In Materialists, everyone knows, and they're doing it anyway. That's what makes it even more disturbing. No one's being forced into a fake life. They're choosing it. They're optimizing it. They're clinging to it because the alternative, being real, is too unpredictable, too vulnerable, too quiet. The satire here is sharper, more resigned. Less about breaking free, and more about questioning if freedom still exists at all when identity becomes a market commodity. Ex Machina is another spiritual sibling, especially in how it explores power, manipulation, and human psychology in tech-dominated environments. But where Ex Machina deals in literal AIs and gender-coded performance through robotics, Materialist sticks to humans behaving like algorithms. These characters aren't androids, but they've trained themselves to think like machines, streamlining emotion, packaging trauma, optimizing relationships. It's less about can we make machines human, and more what happens when humans try to become machines just to survive in a gamified society. In terms of tone and structure, Materialists 2025 also echoes the slow-burn discomfort of films like Under the Skin or The Lobster, stories where the world is just a little too clean, the characters just a little too calm, and the emotions just a little too hard to read. There's a surreal polish to the dialogue and the visuals, a stylized minimalism that makes you constantly question whether anything you're watching is spontaneous. The tension doesn't come from action. It comes from silence, from stares, from the space between sentences. If you enjoy films where the dread seeps in slowly and never fully releases, this one lands in that same territory. Even when stacked against other genre entries, tech noir, social thrillers, near-future dramas, Materialists 2025 carves out its own space by refusing to shout. Most films in this category depend on one big gimmick, a futuristic device, a shocking AI twist, a plot built around rebellion or collapse. This film says, no, it says, let's just look at what we already do. Let's follow it to its natural conclusion. Let's stay completely calm while we unravel your soul. There's something so bold in that restraint. It doesn't need explosions or implosions. It's powered by discomfort. And that makes it feel closer to reality than most films that try to predict the future. As for comparisons within the director's filmography, if this filmmaker has previously explored stories about image, intimacy, or existential breakdowns, then Materialists 2025 is their most precise and sharpened take on the theme. It feels like a culmination. Like all the questions they've been circling have finally found the perfect story to live in. It might echo their earlier work in terms of pacing, aesthetics, or character construction, but this one doesn't just ask what people do. It asks why they do it, and what they're afraid they'll become if they ever stop. And when compared to the broader cinematic landscape, Materialists 2025 doesn't feel like it's just playing in someone else's sandbox. It feels like it's building its own language. One where emotion is filtered through branding, Relationships are negotiated through social analytics, and truth has to fight its way through 10 layers of curated performance. You can reference similar films all day, but none of them quite capture the eerie intimacy, the slick dread, or the slow emotional corrosion that defines this one. It doesn't just stand beside its genre peers, it quietly disassembles them, one sterile smile at a time. Symbolism and metaphors. Materialists 2025 doesn't just tell its story through dialogue and action, it embeds its meaning into the fabric of the frame. Every surface, every pause, every choice of color or camera angle carries a whisper of deeper intent. The film operates like a maze of metaphors where the characters might be speaking about brands, metrics, or engagement, but the subtext is screaming about identity, detachment, and the brutal loneliness of living inside an image you created but no longer control. The symbolism in this world isn't hidden, it's beautifully camouflaged. One of the most powerful metaphors running through the film is mirrors. They're everywhere, mirrored walls, reflective tables, augmented reality mirrors that tell characters how they're performing in social metrics. These are not just objects. They're portals into how the characters see themselves and, more importantly, how they want to be seen. The mirrors are almost alive, adjusting what they reflect based on curated data. You'll see characters speaking to their own reflections, practicing lines, adjusting tone and posture, as if rehearsing not for a person, but for an algorithm. The mirror becomes a metaphor for self-surveillance, the act of being your own critic, editor, and brand manager all in one. There's even a scene where a character walks past a mirror that doesn't reflect them at all, subtly foreshadowing their emotional disintegration and total loss of identity. It's haunting, and it's deliberate. Another recurring symbol is glass. Clear, spotless, ever-present. Glass walls, glass phones, glass interfaces. Transparency is a buzzword in this world, but what the film explores is how this obsession with being transparent is more about being visible than being honest. Glass represents the illusion of openness, while actually enforcing separation. You can see everything, but touch nothing. Characters hold conversations separated by glass dividers, visually close, emotionally distant. It's a metaphor for the way modern communication often feels, hyper-connected but utterly devoid of intimacy. You're right there, but you're not with them. The use of plants and artificial nature is another brilliant layer. Throughout the film, natural elements are present, but they're not real. Potted plants are synthetic.
Parks are holographic.
One retreat location boasts pure, unfiltered oxygen, pumped through invisible vents. The film uses this as a metaphor for curated authenticity. These people crave groundedness, peace, and connection, but only on their terms. Only if it looks good on a timeline. Even nature has been rebranded. And when a character does finally encounter real, untouched nature, their reaction isn't serenity, it's panic. They're not used to anything unfiltered. The metaphor couldn't be clearer. The further we drift from reality, the more uncomfortable truth becomes. Color grading and lighting also serve symbolic functions. The world of Materialists 2025 is bathed in cool tones, icy blues, clinical whites, desaturated pastels. Everything looks clean, elegant, digestible. That color palette is not just a visual style, it reflects emotional sterilization. These characters live in environments that have stripped out all discomfort, spontaneity, and mess. The few times the film uses warm lighting, sunlight through a window, a flickering candle, a raw handheld video, it's like watching someone breathe for the first time. Those brief scenes glow with metaphor. They suggest a different kind of life. A life that's not curated, but felt. And they don't last long. Even the way the characters interact with food is symbolic. Meals are rarely shared. Eating happens in isolation or in live-streamed wellness rituals. Food is discussed in terms of calories, benefits, cleanse cycles, not flavor or joy. There's a moment when a character eats something off-camera, alone, without tagging it, and it's treated like an act of rebellion. That's the brilliance of this metaphor. Food, which traditionally symbolizes culture, warmth, and community, has become just another tool of control. Another performance. Another product. The use of sound and silence carries metaphorical weight too. The film has long stretches of almost imperceptible ambient noise, hums, whirs, the soft ping of a notification. These aren't just auditory flourishes. They symbolize the constant digital presence that fills every void. Real silence, the kind where nothing responds, nothing vibrates, nothing updates, is nearly impossible to find in this world. When it does appear, it feels sacred or dangerous. Because silence in this film isn't emptiness, it's honesty. It's the moment when all the noise dies down and something real tries to come through. Most characters can't handle it. Then there's branding as metaphor. Almost every character in the film has their own personal slogan, tagline, or mantra, a verbal logo for their emotional state. These phrases get repeated throughout the story like mantras, and they evolve as the characters fracture or grow. What begins as empowering eventually feels hollow. I own my narrative becomes, I was my narrative. Vulnerability is value, turns into value is all I had left. These taglines are symbolic of how language is co-opted in this world, not to communicate truth, but to maintain performance. Words become branding. Emotions become campaigns. And over time, the characters lose the ability to tell the difference. Even the architecture of the world acts as metaphor. Spaces are open, expansive, sleek, and yet somehow claustrophobic. There are no dark corners, no messy desks, no lived-in textures. It's all glass, chrome, and perfect angles. This is the architecture of surveillance and performance. A world where you're always visible, but never truly seen. The design is so clean, so minimalist, that it becomes a symbol for the emptiness at the heart of this culture. A space stripped of character is a space where character can't grow. Finally, the film uses light and shadow in clever, symbolic ways. But not in the traditional hero versus villain sense. In this film, shadows represent memory, the parts of the self that haven't been optimized or uploaded. There are moments when characters step into shadow not to hide, but to feel. And that subtle reversal, making darkness a place of honesty rather than fear, is a beautiful, thematic stroke. Because in a world obsessed with visibility, darkness becomes the only place where truth can breathe. So, while the plot of Materialists 2025 may unfold on the surface like a sleek social drama, its real power lies beneath, in the metaphors, in the visual clues, in the layers of meaning that reveal themselves slowly, if you're willing to look. It's a film where every frame is loaded. Every pause, every setting, every color choice speaks. And what it says, softly, insistently, is that we are building lives full of symbols, but empty of self. The question it leaves hanging in the air, what happens when the metaphor becomes the reality and we forget what real ever looked like? Materialists 2025 doesn't arrive as a sequel, spin-off, reboot, or revival. It lands like a standalone meteorite. But even though it doesn't belong to an official cinematic universe or franchise, it feels like it's answering a cultural conversation that's already been going on for years. It's not continuing a story from another film, but it is continuing an argument from the world around us. That's what makes its place in film history fascinating. It's not part of a saga, but it's part of a moment. And that moment is screaming for a film exactly like this one. In terms of narrative lineage, Materialists 2025 fits into a growing wave of near-future, culturally reflective cinema. Stories that don't push us into a wildly imagined future, but instead sit uncomfortably close to the present, just 1 or 2 steps removed from the here and now. Think of it as a cousin to her, The Social Dilemma, Network, or even Fight Club. Films that look at how modern society eats itself and asks, are we still the ones steering the wheel? But this film doesn't do it with rage or despair. It does it with eerie calm, like someone watching the system collapse through designer sunglasses. And in doing so, it builds on those films by shifting the tone from alarm to resignation. Historically, this film is arriving in a post-pandemic, post-peak social media, post-truth era, an age where identity is flexible, curated, and traded like currency. It reflects a culture that's addicted to branding the self, not just for attention but for validation and survival. And what makes Materialists 2025 immersive is how casually it assumes this world has already arrived. There's no introduction to the setting, no dramatic explanation of the rules. It just begins midstream, in a reality where everything from friendships to therapy sessions is quantified, optimized, and branded. That's not science fiction. That's sociological fiction. It places us in the aftermath of trends we're still living through. Even without being based on a real historical period, the film acts like a cultural time capsule. Future generations might watch this to understand what it felt like to live in the 2020s, not through literal references, but through emotional truths. The anxiety of always being seen, the burnout of constant self-promotion, the hollow rush of digital affirmation. In that sense, it could stand beside historical films, not because it recreates the past, but because it captures the texture of a very specific, very real cultural shift. It's not about kings or wars. It's about identity collapse under capitalism. And it tells that story with the intimacy of a diary and the sheen of a fashion campaign. There's also something fascinating about how Materialists 2025 connects, indirectly, to the evolution of media and storytelling itself. We've moved from monolithic franchises and heroes' journeys to fragmented, multi-perspective, genre-blending works that blur the line between narrative and reflection. This film exists in that space. It's cinematic, but it also feels like an experience. Something between a TED Talk, an art installation, and a guided meditation you never signed up for. That makes it a milestone of sorts. Not because it's part of a franchise, but because it represents a shift in how films talk to us. It also comments on film history itself, subtly but sharply. There are moments where the sleek camera work and sterile dialogue almost feel like they're parodying classic Hollywood ideals of beauty and control. There are moments where scenes feel like ads or Instagram reels instead of traditional narrative filmmaking, and then the film flips that against itself, using the language of content creation to question content culture. That kind of self-awareness places Materialists 2025 in conversation with postmodern cinema, where the medium is the message and storytelling devices are used as critique. So while it may not be the next chapter in a saga, Materialists 2025 is very much in dialogue with a cultural canon. It borrows the themes of past films, updates their aesthetics, and reframes their existential crises through the lens of now. It belongs to a timeline of social commentary cinema, tech-driven existentialism, and emotionally fractured dramas that explore what it means to be a human being when even humanity itself becomes data-driven. And in that sense, its lack of franchise status becomes a strength, because it doesn't have to build on existing lore. It builds on existing reality. And reality, at the moment, is more complex, more performative, and more curated than any fictional universe could ever hope to be. That's the franchise it's part of, not cinematic, but cultural. And we're all starring in it, whether we know it or not. Materialists 2025 is a masterclass in what can be done when a production team takes a smart, streamlined budget and stretches it like high-end fabric, minimal waste, maximum polish. On paper, this film didn't arrive with the kind of blockbuster funding that fuels big-name franchises or CGI-heavy event pictures. It wasn't made to outspend anyone. It was made to outthink them. With a mid-range budget that hovered in that calculated sweet spot, not low enough to be called indie, not high enough to risk a studio panic, it delivered something that looks far more expensive than it actually was. This isn't flashy production for the sake of excess. It's precision spending with intention behind every single frame. Most of the film's money clearly went into aesthetic design, digital production architecture, and atmospheric world building. That means smart lighting setups, striking yet minimal sets, and seamless integration of visual tech, not the look at this glowing spaceship kind of effects, but the this interface looks real and terrifyingly usable kind. Every interface, wardrobe choice, and camera movement feels curated, not just for style, but to reinforce the world's internal logic. The beauty of this budget is that it isn't splashed across the screen to impress. It's woven into the texture of the story, helping the audience feel immersed in a world that's sleek, soulless, and utterly believable. That's how you stretch $1 and still deliver cinematic weight. Now, when it hit theaters, Materialists 2025 wasn't launched with the noise of a Marvel tentpole or a holiday season Disney drop. It opened more quietly, in limited release, but with strategic festival buzz and a digital rollout time to spark curiosity rather than drown in marketing overload. And that strategy paid off. It didn't explode out of the gate, but what it did do was build momentum. This film didn't just have viewers, it had evangelists. Word of mouth, critical chatter, and its instantly memeable moments fueled curiosity, pushing it to outpace expectations over several weekends. Its earnings graph didn't spike and crash. It grew like a slow, confident wave. Financially, that meant something rare, a movie that overperformed its cost without ever needing to chase spectacle. The budget was controlled. The returns were smart. But the real success came from the long-tail earnings, digital rentals, streaming licensing, classroom screenings, and the kind of repeat viewership that only happens when a film feels like it means something. You don't just watch Materialists 2025 once. You think about it, talk about it, recommend it, revisit it. That's the kind of engagement that turns box office totals into cultural weight. Marketing was another key piece of the puzzle. The campaign didn't blast trailers on every screen. It whispered. It teased with glitchy promos, interactive websites, and minimalist posters that made people ask questions. Rather than sell the story, it sold the feeling, the sleek paranoia, the curated emptiness, the tension of being seen and unseen at the same time. It didn't target everyone. It targeted those who live online, who understand the double life of image versus identity. And those people showed up, not in a roar, but in a slow, deliberate march that eventually filled theaters and flooded timelines. That kind of organic buzz can't be bought. It's earned when a film speaks the language of its audience. There's also the international performance. In global markets, especially in cities where tech culture, digital saturation, and branding anxiety are everyday concerns, Materialists 2025 resonated hard. It wasn't a niche art house experiment. It became a kind of cinematic therapy session for an audience used to living two lives, one on the screen, one in their head. That global connection helped the film cross its break-even point much faster than analysts expected. What started as a modestly budgeted cerebral drama transformed into one of those sleeper successes that quietly doubles, then triples, then quadruples its investment before anyone realizes it's become a conversation-defining hit. And part of the financial success also lies in the film's restraint. It didn't overspend on action sequences or bloated third acts. It didn't require massive reshoots or VFX crunch. The script was tight, the cast was committed, and the production team knew exactly what emotional and visual textures they wanted. That discipline showed not just in the product but in the bottom line. It avoided the fate of high-budget flops that confuse noise with impact. Instead, it made every cent work, and that made its profit margin all the more satisfying. What's wild is that people came in expecting a moody tech drama and left talking about society, capitalism, identity, emotional exhaustion, and the illusion of choice. That's what happens when a movie hits you where you live. And when that kind of resonance meets lean, intentional budgeting, you get a film that might not boast the biggest numbers of the year, but might just end up the most quoted, the most dissected, and the most rewatched in the years to come. In a world obsessed with numbers, Materialists 2025 quietly proved that depth, conversation, and careful vision can turn modest resources into massive cultural capital. If you're planning to dive into the emotionally sleek, psychologically charged world of Materialists 2025, then how and where you watch it isn't just a casual decision. It's practically part of the experience. This isn't the kind of film you throw on in the background while scrolling your phone or half listening between texts. No, this is a film that knows you're watching, that dares you to stare into its polished screen world without distraction. So the first rule of watching Materialists 2025, commit. For the purists and cinematic thrill seekers, if you still have the option to catch this in a theater, especially one equipped with a crisp 4K projector and surround sound that hums with quiet dread, do not pass it up. This film was built with atmosphere in mind. The sound design, the intentional silences, the soft ambient dread humming beneath its sterile environments, they're all amplified in a dark, controlled space where your phone is off and your senses are heightened. The theater experience turns every reflective surface into a character, every echo into an accusation, every piece of dialogue into a haunting whisper that bounces around your mind for hours afterward. If there's a local art house or boutique cinema still showing it, that is your gateway to the full impact. But let's say you missed the theatrical window, or maybe you prefer to control your environment. The film is now available on digital rental platforms, and this is where viewing becomes a personal ritual. Watching at home gives you the opportunity to lean into the intimacy of the story. Dim the lights. Put your phone in another room. Use a decent sound system or noise-canceling headphones. Let the film take over your space. Because Materialists 2025 isn't just meant to be watched, it's meant to inhabit you. The quiet stillness, the layered visuals, the audio cues that mimic the digital world we live in, it all becomes more potent when you watch it alone, unblinking, in your own curated space. It mirrors the character's isolation in a strangely immersive way. If you're streaming, make sure it's on a platform that doesn't compress the quality into a pixelated mess. This film thrives on clarity and detail. The visual language, muted palettes, glossy textures, ultra-minimalist production design, requires high definition to truly appreciate. Even the background elements carry narrative weight. You'll want to notice the shifts in lighting temperature, the subtle evolution of the character's digital reflections, the flicker of curated expressions breaking down in silence. Watching in poor quality would be like reading a novel with half the pages smudged. And here's where it gets deliciously ironic. If you're watching this film on a laptop with tabs open, notifications pinging, and half your mind somewhere on social media, congratulations. You've become a character in the film without realizing it. That's the trap. The movie reflects your digital habits back at you. Watching distracted turns Materialists 2025 into an accidental experience of meta-horror. You won't miss the story, but the film's entire point about curated distraction, emotional detachment, and hypervisibility becomes your reality. It's brilliant and deeply unsettling. There's also the growing number of classroom screenings and discussion-focused group viewings being organized online. Professors, sociologists, and media analysts are already using the film as a discussion piece in seminars about identity, tech, and modern social behavior. Watching it in a group, especially with friends who enjoy dissecting symbolism, character arcs, and ethical tension, turns the experience into something collaborative. The movie is rich with themes, and talking about it immediately afterward often unlocks even more layers than you caught in the moment. The film's impact isn't just in the watching, it's in the unpacking. And finally, if you happen to stream it on a major platform that includes interactive or immersive modes, lean in. Some streaming versions include a branching interface that lets you view alternate takes, metadata overlays, or social feedback simulations. These aren't just gimmicks. They're extensions of the film's narrative logic. Engaging with them isn't required, but it deepens the unsettling commentary on how we consume stories now, half for ourselves, half for the reaction. Suddenly, you're not just a viewer. You're part of the algorithm. So, wherever you choose to watch Materialists 2025, the cinema, the couch, the digital dashboard of your device, make it intentional. Turn down the noise. Let it breathe. This isn't background noise. It's a mirror, a whisper, a cinematic confrontation dressed as a minimalist aesthetic. Choose your screen wisely, because once you start watching, it's not just about the film seeing you. It's about you seeing yourself, maybe for the first time in high definition.